These two books, as I hold them and I look at them here, I'm reminded of what a very difficult journey of writing they were for me. And I think you'll easily see that as I talk more about them. And yet, they're very dear to me, and they will challenge me to live in a better way for the rest of my life. Both books show that one of the major problems for us in our country is our failure to look clearly into the roots of our social problems and how they affect us personally as well as our nation. We seem to have fallen into the habit of band-aiding the symptoms of pain and frustration in our society. And we only seem to pay attention to the loudest and the most violent groups. These two short books are my effort to go beyond the surface and into the deep core of the problems causing the fear, anger, frustration, and divisiveness in our culture. The sacrament of reconciliation in our liturgical churches, and the similar process of making amends in Alcoholics Anonymous instruct us that the very process of healing and creating a foundation for change and a new way of life comes from self-responsibility. This kind of self-responsibility means that we must be humble enough and tough enough to directly, with eyes wide open, face our reality, examine ourselves, and accept the effects of our actions and our failures to act on ourselves and others. This is my intention in these two books that are based on my personal experiences in this society, in this country that I love. In the next edition of The Rage and the Shame, I'm going to add an introduction which will set the book in the context I intend before I drop you straight into my personal process. And I would like to share this introduction with you tonight. The rest of the book will be the same. I begin the introduction with a quotation from Václav Havel. And he says, "You don't want to become involved with the dirt that is around you." And one day, all of a sudden, you wake up and realize you are a dissident, that you are a human rights activist. Too many people would love for us to lose heart and believe that these times are hopeless, that we have no power and therefore little reason to act. But the history of our country tells us that our birth as a nation began in a time when there was a crisis of faith, despair, and conflict. Our history teaches us not to throw hope away because it is meant to be reborn during our darkest hours. Our challenge as Americans is to face ourselves and reclaim the heart of our democracy. Our challenge is to bring forth a new day, a total change in our perspective and in the reality of how we're living as citizens. Now, this book is my effort to recognize an unexpected, nightmarish time as an extraordinary transformational moment. More often than not, such moments are rooted in grief, rage, and shame. But if we accept these dark moments and look through them, the path toward a new vision of life will unfold. Transformation always begins with fully accepting our reality. And this book is my impassioned effort to look in the mirror and see our social reality as I have experienced it, including its dark side that too many of us have denied, and to initiate ideas for change. And believe me, if we don't become partners in initiating the changes knocking on our doors, they will kick our doors open. Then they will force us to pay a higher price than was originally asked of us. An old saying tells us that at the stroke of midnight, noon is born. At the darkest hour of the night, the approach of a new day begins, and there is evidence of hope. Yet I know all too well that before we get a glimmer of light, there is darkness in the approach to the turning point, and darkness after it. The presidential election of 2016 was a midnight hour for me. And I wrote this book as part of my struggle through the bewildering pre-dawn hours of concern for the state of affairs in our nation. As I wrote and struggled with my experience in our reality, I became convinced that we must not lose heart, but rather answer the call of the future to redress our failures to act and our blindness to our social problems. The large numbers of our fellow citizens who are suffering, being hurt, and dehumanized by the character of our culture. But even more than that, I had to face my denial of how I was being damaged and dehumanized, and so were my children and grandchildren. I was raised, and I raised my children in a culture where denial came all too easily. The artful denial of problems and the crying need for changes was coupled with a persona that reflected a rigid maintenance of a positive attitude. And this combination only strengthens our problems and fills them with a power that is unseen until it explodes in our faces. It is more obvious than I like to believe that we naturally tend to avoid delving into the complexity, emotional impacts, and confusion of problems calling for major changes. Seeking to penetrate and understand the roots of problems, demanding real change, whether personal or societal, requires all of the power of our hearts and minds. And for this very reason, you may find some of this book as hard to read as I found it to write. Facing the fact that we citizens have been asleep at the wheel of our democracy for decades without realizing it is as bitter as midnight is dark. But it is the first step toward a new day. Today is our time in history. This is our quest, the challenge the future has put in front of us. It is also a time for us to remember the great heritage which is our strength. Our nation has had the ability to stand up to any challenge, no matter how difficult it has been. And it is time for us to be engaged in the arena with both heart and soul. The prologue and opening chapter of this book reflect the experiences of my midnight hour. Clearly, I'm not writing to bash any candidate or political party. The rage and shame that I express are symptoms of the deeper issues that I want to face. My concerns begin with looking into my rude awakening to the disappointment, meanness, cruelty, violence, and indifference that lie behind the prosperous facade of the society that we have created. Accepting this reality lays the foundation for a new path into the future. And I openly share the rage and shame that come from facing my part, my blindness, in helping create this society. My hope comes from our heritage, our potentials for change, and the solutions I present and discuss. As I was writing, I used my experience in living for over 8 decades. My life as a Jungian psychoanalyst, writer, and lecturer, my years of working in business, my time as a volunteer in inner city poverty areas, my participation in our repressive, positive thinking zeitgeist, and as a member of a cross-generational family ravaged by a warped health and mental health care system. To trace how over the decades, we Americans have veered from our country's highest values of democracy, liberty, equality, and opportunity for all toward indifference, blindness, and overbearing self-interest. In this book, I am very clear that I am no enemy of capitalism, but a critic of the heartless capitalism and predatory power structures we feel too weak to oppose. But as we learn how to confront ourselves and answer the call of the future, we can rediscover our power in the heart of our democracy. When our past and our reality is seen clearly, this vision can release us and become a torch lighting the way to a new day. We can change our world because that possibility is built into our Constitution, and we have changed it many times before. So now is the time for us to step into the challenges of the future. And before I finish with the rage and the shame, I would like to take just a minute to read the table of contents to you. So it opens with a prologue, which I title Midnight. Chapter 1 is accepting the death of my vision of our society. Chapter 2 is the creative power in facing ourselves. Chapter 3 is daring to become vulnerable, awake, and realistic. Chapter 4 is Isn't It Time to Quit Being the Meanest Developed Nation? Chapter 5 is Poor and Hopeless in the Land of Plenty. Chapter 6 is Daring to Wake Up, Purpose-Driven Help Where It Is Needed. Chapter 7, It is Time to Stop Treating Each Other like we are enemies. Chapter 8, Isn't It Time to Quit Being the Cruelest Developed Nation? Chapter 9, 2008, Punched in the Gut by the Folks We Trusted. And then Chapter 10, Power Up, Reclaiming the Heart of Our Democracy. And I titled the afterword, Light is Always Born Out of Midnight. So my second book, an open letter to the students of Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School, the subtitle, Do We Have the Courage to Face Our Failures and Prove We Value Our Children? Was born from my reflections on Chapter 4, Isn't It Time to Quit Being the Meanest Developed Nation? And Chapter 8, Isn't It Time to Quit Being the Cruelest Developed Nation? In this book, I approach these students as if I were in the sacrament of reconciliation or in the process of making amends in AA. I say to them, I am humbled as I have watched and listened to you. You have caused me to realize that I must look in the mirror into my own soul and my responsibility as an elder and a citizen in the history of these events. I know all too well that hiding under the bed, ignoring or denying the evil around me, is a way of being engaged in it. And living in denial is living a lie. So I must say with deep regret that my generation has failed you. I have failed you. The generations we have parented have failed you. We have failed to recognize the real problems behind these continuing murders. Our democracy has failed you. Our democracy has become weak because of the older generation's shallow approach to it and the large number of people who have given up on it. You have seen the results of this failure when you encountered your state legislature and the lack of what happened after you visited the president. The first step in being able to learn from and grow beyond our failures is to recognize them. Unless we have the humility and the courage to carry out this encounter, we will discover that our failures will repeat themselves continually. Now, I believe that we can face our failures and awaken our hearts. As I go forward in my discussion, I ask two major questions that we have failed to ask ourselves. I want to share them with you in a brief part of my discussion of them in the book. The first question is, why do so many of us want to own weapons designed to kill human beings? Weapons designed for mass murder. What is it that makes us terrified of losing these weapons? Is it about the fear that I don't matter? Then I give two case examples in the book, one of Michael, a physician, and Marlene, an attorney, who felt empowered by their experiences with guns. And I go on to say, neither Michael nor Marlene has any desire to own a gun designed for the mass destruction of human beings. So what do their stories have to do with my questions of why so many of us want to own weapons of mass destruction, and why are we afraid of losing them? Just this. We have been living in a rising sea of stress, anxiety, and fear for decades. Toxic stress comes from anxiety and fear. Anxiety is caused by threats or perceived threats that are beyond our control. Fear comes from the anticipation of or the appearance of things or situations that threaten us directly. Threats may be physical, emotional, psychological, or all of the above. I wonder if through repression and denial and the illusions of positive thinking, or that things are getting better, that we have become adjusted to living with toxic stress, anxiety, and fear. I wonder if we no longer realize how prevalent it is and how much it dehumanizes us. Have we become like fish who aren't aware that they're swimming in a very polluted ocean? At a subliminal level, we must know we're living in a society where we're feeling increasingly threatened and powerless. The reality is we don't feel safe. Our jobs do not feel secure. Our streets don't feel safe. Marlene didn't feel safe in her upper middle class home. Medical costs can wipe us out. College costs can bury us and our children for decades. Getting a decent job at any age, at any level, has become a challenging, humiliating experience. And the list goes on. In addition, as you students in Parkland have discovered, we don't feel like we have any power in our democracy, nor in general do we feel like our government on any level gives a damn about our welfare. In addition, other developed countries have health care for everyone for life. And no matter what you have heard from politicians or vested interest groups, it is better on the average than ours, which is by far the most expensive in the world. The last time I looked at the World Health Organization statistics, we were ranked 37th, just ahead of Cuba. Then these countries have free university training. Their young adults and their families are not saddled with huge educational debts for decades. Moreover, they have a livable minimum wage. People who work can have the hope for a decent life. They also have respectable retirement benefits. And good retirement benefits, medical care, help everyone face the future without dread. Plus, what really stuns me is they are more democratic than we are. In general, wealth and political influence are much more separate than in this country. Campaigns are short and stop a few days before elections to give citizens time to think and make their decisions. I would also like to point out that these developed nations are not, in fact, socialist. Social concern doesn't make a socialist country. They all have free market capitalist systems. The second question I address is, why do some of us end up being mass murderers? In this question, I am speaking about out front mass murderers, especially those in schools. I am not speaking about the more secretive murderers who hide people in graves and often murder people one person at a time for years. So let's take a look at the history of school shootings. Justin Gruber from Parkland said at the White House, "I am only 15 years old. I am a sophomore. 19 years ago, the first school shooting, Columbine, at Columbine High School happened. I was born into a world where I never got to experience safety and peace." Yes, Justin, but I am ashamed to say the first school shooting was not 19 years ago. It was 52 years ago at the University of Texas Tower in Austin, Texas. 14 people were killed and 31 wounded with semi-automatic weapons. This dramatic tragedy compelled two of our greatest psychological thinkers, Dr. Eric Fromm and Dr. Rollo May, to extensively study and explain what was taking place in our society to produce such a staggering catastrophe. And this is a crucial question. What is taking place in our society to produce such a staggering catastrophe? Not what is taking place in this person. Both men, as experienced psychoanalysts and social commentators, knew these types of events are not the results of some kind of a simple mental breakdown. In their great books, The Anatomy of Human Destructiveness and Power and Innocence, A Search for the Source of Violence, these two great thinkers came up with the answers. Unfortunately, we have been under the bed. We have been too busy, too blind, too far into self-interest, and simply put, too weak to face the answers we need to face. And because of our failure, we have remained victims. Thank you, students in Parkland, for becoming warriors for the soul of our culture. Don't ever stop. And I will repeat, I am urging everyone in my generation and the ones we raised to come out from under the bed and join you. Dr. Fromm and Dr. May both came to the clear conclusion that if we are dehumanized to the point of feeling totally alienated from ourselves, our emotions, our potential, and our ability to belong and function in our social tribe, we become destructively evil. Alienation, the extreme, isolated, and hopeless state of dehumanization, of feeling invisible even to oneself, causes a profound inner rage and the urge or compulsion to destroy life, social structures, and even oneself. Alienated individuals become trolls on the internet, and if they're cut off enough from themselves in society, they can become murderers and serial rapists. Dr. Fromm called these life-destroying actions malignant aggression. When alienated people come together, they become militia groups, cults, and terrorists. Alienated citizens can vote against their own self-interest out of rage and despair. Nicholas Cruz in Parkland, like most of these murderers, wanted to wreak destruction, gain huge publicity by destroying, in order to symbolically scream, "I exist." And this is my revenge for being denied that. The first step in solving any problem is to recognize it. This means we must have the courage, and let me repeat that, the courage to face the true source of these murders and penetrate into the heart of darkness behind them. Then we must act. We must be willing to be strongly aggressive and determined in the service of life. And this leads me to my third question. Can we afford not to care for each other? But at this point, because of time, I'm going to have to stop. I hope you will carefully read the answer to this question and the section following it in the book. The section following it is titled, "We have another serious problem. We are afraid of facing real life." These are directions that I hope you will reflect on and that will inspire you to action. As I'm finishing up, I want to share a few words from Robert F. Kennedy's great speech on humanity that he gave in South Africa. And I've held this speech in my heart for over 50 years. Senator Kennedy challenged us by saying, "We must do this not because it is economically advantageous, although it is, not because the laws of God command it, although they do. We must do it for the single and fundamental reason that it is the right thing to do." Then as I'm concluding, before taking some questions, I want to repeat. Today is our time in history. This is our quest. The challenge the future has put in front of us. It is also a time for us to remember the great heritage which is our strength. Our nation has had the ability to stand up to any challenge, no matter how difficult it has been. It is time for us to be engaged in the arena with heart and soul. Thank you. You have any questions, or what do you think? It's a lot to think about.
It's hard not to feel apathetic sometimes because there's so much promoting that you can't really do anything about it. Or that's where I am. I feel like there's
Yes.
very little option or alternative to do anything about the grand social scheme that is orchestrated.
Yes. You know, that's not the first time we've run into that. They ran into this, I don't know when, 1774 or sometime around then.
Can you repeat the
Yes,
question?
it's hard not to feel apathetic. There's so many forces making us try to feel like there's nothing we can do about it. Okay? We felt like that at the beginning of our country. And what impressed me was that our forebears fought with determination.
Voice, volume.
Okay, our forebears fought with determination for 6.5 years. For most of those years, losing most of the battles, and finally won the war, feeding the most powerful nation in the Western world at that time. We face a similar challenge. We've got to vote. And we have got to start demanding that the people we vote for are worthy of us and are supporting the values of our country and of us. And we've got to realize it's not going to change quickly. We need to get out of this mode of quick fixes and realize we're going to be committed because the future is worth it. To me, it's worth it for my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren, and I have a duty to stay with it. And our whole culture pushes us to want to have Band-Aids and quick fixes, and they want to have us rejoice in a single victory. If we have a blue wave in November, everybody wants to think it's all over. No, it's only the first step. And whether we have a blue wave or not, it's still only the first step. And if we don't do that, we give up being citizens and become subjects. And we're becoming subjects of an oligarchy of powerful businesses and powerful families. We're becoming like Russia. Yes.
I want to thank you for not retiring and just heading out to dinner every now and then, and to still being part of everything. And I think that's one of the things that these young people show is that there is a big hole in the middle of society of people who don't want to be active, who feel they deserve something, and they're just waiting until they don't have to work anymore, and then everything will be okay. So I want to thank you for still being engaged and
Good, thank you. Thank you.
always in a society. We need to be elders.
We need to be elders, and we need to be active elders, and we need to realize whatever your perspective, whether it's God or life, the goddess or fate, if we're all living longer, it's for a purpose. And we need to grasp that purpose.
It reminds me of when I die, I want to be alive.
Yes. Oh,
You're talking about the values of our country. I mean, sometimes that's pretty ambiguous. There's many who think one of our key values is the Second Amendment, and others who are pacifists. So how do we decide we're fighting for the values of our country?
they're the values our countries are founded on. Democracy, freedom, I forgot what I said now. Opportunity for all and dignity for all. And in that framework, there's room for all of these other things that you're talking about. But it's the basic founding values of our country that then our Constitution grew out of. And we have to go back to those very basic values first, in my mind.
One basic value was the value of slavery.
Pardon?
One basic value back then was the value.
No, it wasn't a value that our country was founded on. It was a problem that our country had and paid a heavy price in blood for having. But we were the only country in the world that paid a price in blood for having it, and that affected the world. I don't justify slavery, I don't believe in slavery, but we paid a price for it.
How do you think that we can possibly reach this seemingly half of the country that is living in hatred and in ignorance and in racism? It's a huge battle to get to these people. How can we get to them?
I have a chapter on each one of the areas that I think are the source of those values, and the rage and the shame, and what I think we can do about it. And it's going to be, again, a journey. We have to accept that these things are journeys, and they're not quick fixes, and that we can put programs in to help them, and that we have to be consistent in those programs, but we have to be willing to realize those programs have to evolve. We have to change them to fit the situation. We have to keep them growing, and we have to realize that we're not going to be 100% successful. But the areas of health care, of poverty and education, of underemployment, of no safety net for people when they lose their jobs, these things can be fixed, but they can't be fixed until we have campaign finance reform. We have a tough job ahead of us. We've been asleep for 40 years. Like Rip Van Winkle, we're waking up in a whole different world that, at least in my part, I didn't imagine. Yes?
So who was the last great role model, or who would you say who's your role model? Besides
Carl Jung. Here's what we're facing. There is not going to be a president or a party that can save us. We're beyond that now. We have to take responsibility for our citizenship, and we have to be the ones that redefine our country, redefine our ideals, and give the strength to empower the direction of them. So it's up to us now.
And how do you reconcile individuation with being part of a tribe? Because I think that's part of what's lost in our culture.
Well, individuation always should bring us back into a sense of community. It shouldn't isolate us from that. It should give us the kind of maturity that brings us back into being able to relate to each other in a more caring and mature way. And our individuation should benefit our society.
So,
Okay, go ahead.
it sounds like on this question about last role model, that what I think I hear you saying is we need to create the model
No, we need to be the model.
and create a new model.
No, we need to be the model.
Gotcha.
Okay. It needs not to be out there, it needs to be in here.
And affect like our locus of control.
Yes.
Directly what we can
Yes.
affect.
Yes. And that grows. That spreads. And every great revolution or change in life started somewhere in some individual that nobody knew about. Yes.
So what tactics do you suggest people use? We've tried marching, we've tried letters to the editor, we've tried voting, tried going to public hearings. What else can we do?
Well, keep doing that for one thing,
Yeah.
and keep voting. and get more active in demanding that our candidates be worthy of us and what we want.
Maybe we need more than two parties.
That could be, but we're not demanding what we want from the parties we've got so far, at least by and large. I have plenty of Republican friends that have left the Republican Party, and I have plenty of Democratic friends that have left the Democratic Party. And there's nothing wrong with being independent and demanding that candidates respond to us if they want our vote. They're not going to get it because I'm in a party. Thank you very much.
Thank you.